Imagine a world power demanding your very soul. In 1900, a British governor walked into the heart of the Asante Empire and demanded to sit upon their most sacred object, the Golden Stool. He didn't realize he had just triggered a war that would cement the legacy of one of the greatest female commanders in history. Standing in his way was not a young warrior, but a 60-year-old grandmother named Yaa Asantewaa, who was ready to burn the world down to protect her people's dignity.
To understand the fire that burned within Yaa Asantewaa, we have to understand the land that forged her. She was born around 1840 in Besese, in what is now modern-day Ghana. Growing up in the Asante Empire, she wasn't just a face in the crowd. She was born into a society where women held significant power, a matrilineal culture where the bloodline and the right to rule passed through the mother. Her brother, Afrane Panin, became the chief of Edweso, a powerful administrative region within the empire.
In her early years, Yaa Asantewaa was a farmer. She worked the red earth of the forest, cultivating cocoa and crops, gaining a reputation for her intelligence and her unwavering commitment to the traditions of her ancestors. But life in the late 19th century was anything but peaceful. The British Empire was expanding its reach, hungry for the gold and resources of the African interior. The Asante, a proud and sophisticated warrior nation, stood directly in their path. The British had already fought several wars against the Asante, but by the 1890s, the pressure was reaching a breaking point. In 1896, the British used their superior firepower to seize the Asante capital of Kumasi. They didn't just take the city, they committed an act of psychological warfare. They arrested and exiled the Asante king, the Asantehene Prempeh I, along with his family and top advisors. Among those hauled away into exile was Yaa Asantewaa's own grandson.
For the Asante people, this was a wound that wouldn't heal. Their king was gone, their leaders were in chains, and a British residency was established in Kumasi to oversee their civilization. But even with the king in exile, the British knew they didn't truly own the Asante. There was one thing missing. They needed the Golden Stool. To the Asante, the Golden Stool, or the Sikaja Kofi, is not a piece of furniture. It is the vessel for the soul of the Asante nation. Legend says it descended from the sky in a cloud of white dust, landing on the lap of the first Asante king. It is so sacred that it is never allowed to touch the ground, and no one, not even the king himself, is permitted to sit on it. It represents the unity, the ancestors, and the very survival of the people. Enter Sir Frederick Hodgson, the British governor of the Gold Coast. In March 1900, he arrived in Kumasi and held a meeting with the remaining Asante chiefs. He didn't understand the culture he was trying to dominate. He stood before the leaders and demanded to know why the Golden Stool hadn't been handed over to the Queen of England. He went further, committing the ultimate sacrilege. He demanded that the stool be brought out so that he, as the representative of the British Crown, could sit upon it. The room went silent. To the chiefs, this wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of spiritual war. If the British sat on the stool, the Asante nation would cease to exist in the eyes of their gods and ancestors.
Later that night, the chiefs met in secret to discuss their response. Many were afraid. They saw the Maxim guns and the cannons the British brought with them. They spoke of diplomacy and surrender, fearing that a rebellion would lead to the total annihilation of their villages. Yaa Asantewaa, who was present in her role as the Queen Mother of Edweso, listened to these men in silence until she could take no more. She stood up, her voice cutting through the shadows of the room. She famously asked them, "How can a proud people allow their king to be taken and then sit by while a foreigner demands their soul?" She looked at the men and said, "Now I see that some of you fear to go forward to fight for our king. If it were in the brave days of old, the days of Ose Tutu and Opokuware, chiefs would not sit down to see their king to be taken away without firing a shot. No European could have dared speak to chiefs of Asante in the way the governor spoke to you this morning. Is it true that the bravery of Asante is no more? I cannot believe it. It cannot be. I shall say this, if you, the men of Asante, will not go forward, then we will."
We, the women, will. I shall call upon my fellow women. We will fight the white men. We shall fight until the last of us falls in the battlefields."
To drive her point home, she picked up a gun and fired it into the air. That moment changed everything. Shamed by her courage and inspired by her resolve, the chiefs appointed Yaa Asantewaa as the commander-in-chief of the Asante army. It was the first and only time a woman had ever been given that title.
The War of the Golden Stool began. Yaa Asantewaa didn't just lead from the back, she was a master strategist. She knew the British had better technology, so she didn't fight them in the open. She turned the dense tropical forest into a fortress. Under her command, the Asante built massive stockades, walls made of heavy timber and earth, hidden by the foliage. These stockades were hundreds of yards long and strategically placed to ambush British supply lines.
The Asante warriors, inspired by the Queen Mother, surrounded the British fort in Kumasi. They cut off the telegraph lines and blocked the roads. For months, the British governor and his troops were trapped inside the fort, facing starvation and disease. The Old Woman, as the British disparagingly called her, had the most powerful empire in the world pinned down.
The siege of Kumasi was brutal. The British tried to break out several times, but they were met with a wall of fire from the Asante hidden in the bush. Yaa Asantewaa was everywhere, coordinating the different tribal factions, ensuring the stockades were manned, and keeping the morale of her troops high. She wore a traditional war smock and carried a rifle, a sight that struck fear into her enemies and awe into her followers.
However, the British Empire was vast. They began pouring in reinforcements from all over West Africa, and even from as far as India. The technology gap eventually began to tell. The British used 7-pounder mountain guns and Maxims to blast through the Asante stockades.
Despite the overwhelming odds, Yaa Asantewaa and her forces fought for months. They didn't just defend, they pushed back, making the British pay for every inch of ground they took. It wasn't until late 1900 that the British finally managed to break the siege of Kumasi and began a systematic campaign to hunt down the leaders of the rebellion. Yaa Asantewaa was one of the last to be captured. Even as her generals were caught or surrendered, she remained a symbol of defiance. In 1901, she was finally taken by the British, but even in defeat, she won a significant spiritual victory. The British never found the Golden Stool. Because of the war she led, the Asante were able to hide the stool in the depths of the forest, protecting it from desecration.
The British exiled Yaa Asantewaa to the Seychelles Islands, the same place they had sent the Asante Hene years before. She lived in exile for 20 years, a queen without a kingdom, but a hero whose name was whispered in every household across the Gold Coast. She died on October 21, 1921, never having seen her homeland again.
But the story doesn't end in the Seychelles. The defiance of Yaa Asantewaa bore fruit decades later. Because she had fought to protect the Golden Stool, the soul of the Asante remained intact. When the British eventually allowed the Asante Hene to return in the 1920s, he returned to a people who still knew who they were.
Yaa Asantewaa's legacy became a blueprint for African independence movements. She proved that the colonial powers were not invincible, and that a leader's power doesn't come from their age or their gender, but from their willingness to sacrifice everything for the dignity of their people.
Today, she is remembered as the Joan of Arc of Africa. Her statue stands tall in Ghana, and her name is sung in anthems of resistance. She was the grandmother who looked at an empire and didn't blink. She was the protector of the soul of a nation. She was Yaa Asantewaa. Subscribe for more.